Hi and welcome. In this video, we're going to start looking at what elements are, specifically the identity elements. Now, an element is a word in mathematics that we use to describe variables and numbers, all types of things. Here specifically, we're describing variables and numbers. It's a number or it's a variable. So there's two identity elements we look at. The identity element, in other words, the identity number for addition, is the number 0. And that's because the number 0 maintains any other element's identity. So if you take x and you add it to 0, you still get x. In other words, x does not lose its identity, it doesn't change. And the identity element for multiplication is the number 1 for the same reason. Anything times 1 is itself, so x times 1 is still x. So here we have those two identity elements, 0 for addition, 1 for multiplication. Now we go to the inverse elements. The additive inverse, sometimes called the opposite of any number x, is negative x. Now the additive inverse, as we'll talk about in a moment, is the number you add to another number to get 0. So for example, let's extend this a little bit. If you have 5, you add negative 5 to 5, and then get 0. These two are the additive inverses of each other because their sum is 0. The multiplicative inverse is of any number x is its reciprocal, 1 over x. So for example, we can't really see that. If you have the number 2, its multiplicative inverse is 1/2, 1 over 2, because 2 times 1/2 is 1, so the product is 1. And likewise, or another example might be, let's say you have 2/3. Well, 1 over 2/3 is its reciprocal. This might be hard to see at first, but think about this. 2/3 times 1 over 2/3. 1 over 2/3, you're dividing by a fraction, so it's really 1 divided by 2/3. Let's expand that right here. 1 divided by 2/3. Remember, dividing by the fraction 2/3 is multiplying by its reciprocal, 3/2. So 1 divided by 2/3 is 1 times 3 over 2. 1 times 3 is 3 over 2, so it's 3/2. Notice here 2/3 and 3/2 are reciprocals. You get 6 over 6 or 1. This works. So we have, let's scroll back up, identity element for addition, 0. For multiplication, 1. Remember, identity elements don't change your value. Additive inverse and multiplicative inverse. The additive inverse, two numbers that add to 0. The multiplicative inverse, two numbers that multiply to 1. And now the properties that describe what these elements do. We kind of already said it, but here the additive identity property, x any number plus 0 is itself. So the additive identity property uses the identity element 0 of addition. The multiplicative identity property, x times 1 is x, anything times 1 is itself. That property uses the identity element for multiplication. The inverse property of addition, x plus negative x is 0, that is just a property that says when you add opposites, the result is 0. And the inverse property of multiplication, when you multiply a number and its reciprocal, you get 1. Now there's some beautiful things that happen here, and I'll just describe, let's say, at least one of them. I love this kind of, I love that in mathematics when you start creating a system with numbers and variables, and you think about the way that system works, you get these really beautiful kind of symmetries. What I mean is, if you take a number x, that's not a good color to use, let me switch. If you take a number x and you add its opposite, negative x, you get 0. So if we add two opposites, we get 0. Well, think about if you take a number x and multiply it by its reciprocal, 1 over x. This gets you 1, but think about how cool this is. 1 over x, this right here, what is that? That's x to the negative first. That means the same thing. X to the negative first is 1 over x. So here, when we multiply these two, we have x to the first, right? That's just x times x to the negative first, and we add the exponents, a nice shortcut there. We get x to the 0, which is 1. And what I think is so cool about this is that when you add two opposites, you get 0. When you multiply two reciprocals, you add two opposite exponents, and you get an exponent of 0, which gives you the result 1, which is the identity element of multiplication. When you add opposites, you get the identity element of addition. You see these opposites and zeros appear in both properties. Pretty cool. I hope you appreciate that. Thank you.